I still remember that sound. The wind. It wasn't just air moving through the desert, it was punishment. Each gust scraped against my skin like sandpaper, whispering the same word over and over in my head. Why? Why did he leave me? Why did he do it? My name's Frank Williams. And if you'd told me 10 years ago that my own stepson would abandon me to die under that burning sun, I would have laughed in your face. Because back then, I thought family meant something. I thought love meant loyalty. Turns out, I was wrong about both. I met Laura 20 years ago. She was all warmth and motion, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and calm everyone down just by smiling. She had this laugh, high, clear, contagious, the kind that made you forget what you were sad about. And she had a son, Ethan, 10 years old, quiet, watchful, one of those kids who looked like he was always trying to figure out what you were thinking before you said it. The first time I met him, he didn't speak, just sat there, fiddling with a toy car while Laura made small talk. When I asked if he liked cars, he shrugged. I remember saying, well, that's okay. I like trucks better anyway. And for the first time, he looked up. A tiny smirk. That was the start. It took time, years of time, but I grew into his life one small gesture at a time. Baseball games, science projects, late-night dinners when his mom worked overtime. He'd call me Frank at first, and that was fine. I never pushed for dad, but the first time he slipped, I'll never forget that. He was about 12, helping me fix the lawnmower. He cut his hand on the blade, nothing deep, just enough to make him wince. And when I grabbed a rag and said, "Let me see, kiddo," he muttered, "Thanks, Dad." It was quiet, barely audible, but I heard it. And my whole damn chest swelled up like I'd been handed the world. From that day, I told myself, you'll never let him down, Frank. No matter what. And for a long time, I didn't. High school fights. I was there. Late night pickups from parties. I was there. Even when Laura and I argued, and we did. Like all couples, I made sure Ethan never felt caught in the middle. When he got accepted into college, I was the one cheering loudest at the graduation ceremony. I still have the photo of him in that blue cap and gown, arms slung around my shoulder like we were real father and son. He posted it online with the caption, "Thanks, Frank, for always believing in me." People commented, saying how lucky he was to have a stepdad like me. If only they knew how quickly lucky can turn into foolish. Laura's health started to decline about 6 years after that. Stage 2 breast cancer. She fought hard, harder than anyone I've ever seen. But when you're fighting cancer, time starts working against you. Every doctor's visit became a new kind of dread. Ethan stopped coming around much. He said it was too hard to see her that way. I understood, for I told myself I did. I worked 2 jobs to keep the bills paid and the house running while caring for Laura. I'd sit by her bedside at night, holding her hand while she slept, and think about how proud she'd be when Ethan finally settled down, found purpose. But when she passed early one winter morning, something inside him changed. At the funeral, he looked polished, calm, detached. He made a lovely speech about how his mother was his guiding light. But when he walked past me, he didn't say a word, didn't even look at me. At first, I thought grief was just making him cold, but the weeks after told me otherwise. He stopped answering my calls, stopped visiting. Then one day, he showed up out of the blue, smiling, casual, like nothing had happened. Said he wanted to reconnect, to take a short trip, just you and me, Frank, like old times. He even said his mom would have wanted that. And damn me, but I believed him. I remember feeling that old warmth in my chest again, that need to hold on to family, because when you lose your wife, you cling to whatever's left. He said he'd handle the planning, that he'd found this perfect spot out in the Nevada desert. Said the skies were clear, the stars unbelievable. We left early Saturday morning, 2 coolers of water, camping gear, a beat-up tent, and his mother's old camera he wanted to bring along for memories. The drive was quiet, not awkward, exactly, just distant. I tried to ask about his job, his girlfriend, his plans. He gave short answers, one-word replies. I thought maybe he was still grieving. After a few hours, he pointed to a dirt road veering off the highway and said, "Let's take this way. It's faster." We drove for miles. The road turned into sand, the air shimmering with heat. Finally, he stopped the truck, said he needed to check something under the hood. I got out to stretch my legs. The desert stretched in every direction, endless and cruel. He asked me to grab a water bottle from the back, so I turned to reach for it. When I turned back, he was gone. The truck gone. Just the faint echo of tires spitting dust. At first, I laughed. I thought maybe he was playing a joke, circling around. So, I waited. Minutes passed. The laughter started to feel forced. Then the sun hit noon, and the heat pressed down like a fist. That's when panic set in. I shouted his name until my throat went raw. Ethan, Ethan. But the only thing that answered was the wind. By the time night fell, I was staggering. My lips cracked. My skin burned. I remember lying on the sand, staring at the stars, thinking, this can't be real. He'll come back. He has to. But he never did. When they found me 2 days later, I was half dead. Some truckers saw the glint of my watch in the moonlight. They said another hour, maybe 2, and I'd have been gone. I woke up in the hospital -4 in my arm, skin blistered, barely able to talk. The nurse smiled and said, "You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Williams." Lucky. That word made me want to scream. Because I didn't feel lucky. I felt erased. And deep down, even before I saw him again, I knew. My stepson didn't just abandon me. He wanted me gone. When I woke up in that hospital bed, I didn't know what day it was. I didn't even know if I wanted to know. The nurse said I'd been unconscious for nearly a full day. My body temperature had dropped dangerously low at night, and my kidneys were on the verge of failure. 2 days, that's how long I'd been out there. 2 days with no food, no water, no shade. My first thought wasn't about my body. It was about him, Ethan. I kept hearing the engine fading into the distance. The sound of the sand whipping against my legs as I screamed his name. It played over and over like some sick reel that wouldn't stop. The doctors said I should focus on healing. But how do you heal when you don't know why you were hurt in the first place? The police came the next morning. A young deputy, polite, but with that expression that says he's already made up his mind. He asked me to walk him through what happened. I told him everything, the camping trip, the truck, the moment Ethan disappeared. He scribbled notes, nodded a few times, then asked, "And you're sure it wasn't an accident? Maybe he got lost too." That word accident had twisted something in me. I said, "Deputy." He drove off. I watched him go. He gave this half smile, almost apologetic. Sometimes trauma can confuse memory. We've seen that before. Confuse memory. As if I didn't know what I saw. As if I'd made it all up. They eventually found Ethan, or rather, he found them. He told the police I'd wandered off while he was refueling in town. He said he came back and couldn't find me anywhere. He said he looked for hours. And the worst part, they believed him. He even visited the hospital. Walked in holding flowers, acting shocked and relieved to see me alive. I'll never forget his face. That calm, careful expression, the one he used to wear when he was lying as a kid. He leaned down, patted my arm, and said, "Frank, I'm so sorry. I thought I'd lost you." The nurse smiled, thinking it was some touching family reunion. But I could see it, the flicker in his eyes. He wasn't sorry. He was checking, making sure I hadn't said anything. I stared back at him, and for the first time, I didn't see my stepson. I saw a stranger, a predator hiding in plain sight. He stayed for maybe 5 minutes, then left, promising to come by tomorrow. He never did. When I got discharged a week later, I went home to an empty house. Laura's things were still where she'd left them, her mug on the shelf, her scarf on the chair. But something was off. Half the photos were gone. The box with our marriage license gone. Her jewelry box empty. I called Ethan, straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Where are Mom's things?" No response. 2 days later, I got an email from my bank. A transfer alert. $42,000 gone from my joint account. Transferred to an account under his name. He'd cleaned me out. At first, I thought maybe it was some mistake. But when I called the bank, they said the transaction was authorized under my name, which was impossible. I was still in the hospital when it happened. That's when I realized he must have had access to Laura's records. My passwords, maybe even the spare key. He'd planned this. The trip, the account access, all of it. I went to the police again. They said it was a civil matter, because technically, the account was joint, and there was no proof I hadn't given permission. That was the day I broke. Not because of the money, but because I understood something I never wanted to admit. I'd spent half my life, raising a boy who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to his inheritance. For a few weeks, I barely ate. I stayed in the house with the blinds shut, watching the desert wind kick dust across the yard. Every sound, every creak of wood or hum of the fridge made me jump. Like maybe he'd come back to finish what he started. But he didn't. He'd already erased me once. He didn't need to do it again. What came instead was silence. And in that silence, I started to see clearly. One evening, around midnight, I was going through old boxes, trying to find paperwork to rebuild my finances, when I found Laura's journal, the one she kept by her bedside. I shouldn't have read it, but I did. And in between the entries about doctor visits and family recipes, there was something that stopped my breath cold. Ethan worries about what will happen when I'm gone. He asked if Frank would get everything. I told him no, I'd make sure things are fair. But his tone scared me. He's not the boy he used to be. The date was 2 months before she died. That's when I knew Laura must have changed her will. She must have meant for me to inherit most of the estate, not Ethan. And somehow, he'd found out. That was his motive. But I didn't have proof. Not yet. I remember sitting there in that dim light, staring at her handwriting, shaking with something I hadn't felt in months. Not grief, not fear, something older, sharper, resolve. That's when I made a decision. I wouldn't go to the police again. I wouldn't beg for help. No one believed me anyway. If Ethan wanted to erase me, then I'd let him believe he succeeded, until I was ready to return the favor. The next few months were the hardest of my life. I sold my tools, my truck, even the old furniture just to get by. I rented a small place out by the edge of town, a rundown trailer park where no one asked questions. People assumed I was some washed-up retiree living off scraps. That was fine by me. I needed to disappear, because disappearing gave me time to think. I started visiting the county records office. Quietly, methodically, I learned that Laura's will had indeed been amended 3 weeks before her death. But the document on file named Ethan as the sole beneficiary. The signature was hers, but something about it felt wrong. Her handwriting was careful, looped, neat. This one was jagged, and even, like someone trying too hard to mimic her style. Forgery. I couldn't prove it yet, but I could feel it. And that feeling started building into something else. A plan. Then one night, I had a visitor. A knock at the door, just after dark. It was Mark, an old friend from my contracting days. He looked surprised to see me. Said he'd run into Ethan at a local bar a few nights earlier. Frank, he said, I thought you two made up after the incident. I asked what he meant. Apparently, Ethan had been telling everyone that I'd gone senile. That I'd gotten lost in the desert because I refused to let him drive. That I'd been mentally slipping for a while. And he'd been trying to take care of me. He even told people that I wasn't stable. That Laura's death broke my mind. And the worst part, people believed him. He'd taken my story, twisted it, and used it to make himself the hero. That night, after Mark left, I sat at the table with Laura's journal open in front of me and said out loud, "You were right, honey. He's not the boy we raised." And for the first time, I didn't feel sad saying it. I felt focused. Because if Ethan wanted to paint me as the crazy old man, then I'd let him. Let him get comfortable. Let him think I was broken. While I built something he wouldn't see coming. Something slow, quiet, legal. Because the thing about being underestimated is that no one sees your hands while you're rebuilding the trap. I learned to be invisible. Not the cowardly kind, the patient kind. The kind that waits until the room forgets you're there, then moves the pieces while everyone else watches TV. I changed my routine. I stopped answering calls that I didn't expect. I started wearing plain clothes, the kind that make you forget a person exists. I learned the county clerk's hours, when the courthouse elevators were least crowded, which coffee shop the legal aides preferred for lunch. I took my time like a man who discovered the value of time itself. The first practical thing I did was simple and stupidly obvious in hindsight. I documented everything. Every receipt, every call, every stray message from Ethan. I photocopied bank statements and saved emails. I made lists with dates and times, until the lists looked like a map of the life he'd been carving out for himself at my expense. When you're up against someone who's used to people believing their lies, proof becomes your only language. I also learned to ask for help without saying, "Help." I started volunteering 2 afternoons a week at a small legal Clinic downtown, not because I suddenly loved filing forms, but because I could listen to people and learn how lawyers think. I sat through intake interviews and watched how they assessed credibility, what kinds of phrases raised red flags, how signatures could be challenged. The volunteers treated me kindly, like an older man looking for purpose. I let them. They never asked about Laura's will. I didn't bring it up. I watched. I absorbed. Then there was Rick. Rick was a private investigator in the way old dogs are old dogs, gruff, stubborn, and with a nose for the rotten meat. He lived out of a beat-up sedan and spent his mornings at a greasy spoon diner eating eggs like he was paying for them in cash. I met him because Cliff at that neighborhood dropped off the envelope, made a call late one night and said Rick might have a way to prove this. Rick agreed to take the case for a fee I barely had, and for the first time since the desert, I felt something like hope. Rick didn't do sensational. He did patient, methodical digging. He pulled metadata from emails, traced IP addresses, checked surveillance footage at gas stations, and, most useful of all, he found witnesses who didn't know they were witnesses. A clerk who remembered Ethan picking up a cashier's check the week before my trip. A tow yard worker who'd hauled a vehicle out from a remote service road the day I disappeared. Little things that, when strung together, looked like a rope. He also found something I hadn't expected, the pattern of small frauds. Unreported short-term loans, a second phone number used to sign documents, a shell company registered in a neighboring state for estate consulting. Ethan didn't just want my money, he'd been practicing for it. That knowledge settled in my chest like a stone. I wasn't dealing with a momentary lapse of morality. I was dealing with a career built on cutting corners. With evidence stacking, the moral questions started to chew at me differently. I'd always imagined revenge as a hot thing to shout, confrontation, a scene where the villain gets humiliated and the hero walks away. But what I found myself wanting wasn't spectacle. It was repair. I wanted the truth to stand where my life had been. I wanted Laura's name to mean what it had meant before greed crawled into the margins. I wanted people to see the son she raised for what he'd become. That's the thing about the quiet plan, it tests you. It forces you to decide whether your integrity will match the depth of your wound. There were nights I sat with a bottle of whiskey and felt the old urge to go Shakespearean, to storm the courthouse, to scream, to collapse in front of him. Instead, I rewired that energy into discipline. I learned to deposit timelines, discovered how to fall for an emergency injunction, and how to draft a demand letter that hits legal weak points while posing as conciliatory. I became a student of one man's downfall. I enlisted help where it mattered. A paralegal named Maya at the clinic, young, bright, and a little too eager to help people who'd been wronged, took my case under the table. I told her bits of the story, omitting the most raw details at first, and watched her eyes narrow. She had the kind of righteous anger that makes small fights into big ones. She taught me how to format exhibits, how to ask the right questions in an affidavit so a judge couldn't ignore them, how to push for subpoenas without looking desperate. Rick and Maya worked separately so no one could link them back to me easily. Rick kept giving me small victories, a canceled motel receipt with Ethan's name, a photo taken by a trucker that showed a vehicle similar to the one he'd been driving, a voicemail that hinted at panic in the hours after I disappeared. Maya took those and made paper soldiers out of them, affidavits, sworn statements, timelines. Together, they transformed rumor into a legal beast I could feed to the court. All the while, I kept my interactions with Ethan carefully staged. I let him think I was broken. I let him see me as the old man whose edges were crumbling. It was humiliating in a way I wouldn't have chosen. But humiliation is different from surrender. It's strategy. I played the part because men like him get sloppy when they believe the job is done. They relax. They celebrate. And while they celebrated, they left footprints. Pattern interrupts became a weapon. I sent him small, meaningless gifts that put doubt into his practical brain. A postcard of the desert with the words, "Do you remember this?" printed on the back. An emailed photo of a dusty shoe with a black scrawl. "Did you mean to drop this?" Nothing overt. Nothing that could be pinned on me. Just reminders that the past wasn't buried yet. Each judge made him tighten, and men who tighten make mistakes. Then, the slowest switch flipped. I contacted the assistant district attorney I'd heard about through Chris, a volunteer lawyer at the clinic. I didn't walk in and demand justice. I walked in with a cup of coffee and an organized file. I asked if he had a minute to review an odd set of documents. He did. He read. He asked questions. He requested more. He didn't promise arrests. He asked for time. Time was what we used to stitch the rest of it together. The DA's office subpoenaed bank records. Rick testified about phone location pings. Maya helped the DA's investigators connect the tiny dots. Before long, what once looked like a story that would be shrugged off as family drama became a stack of evidence. Forged documents, suspicious transfers, witness statements placing Ethan near actions he'd denied, and a pattern that suggested intent. And here's the part that perhaps surprised me most. While we were building a case, something else was quietly fracturing in Ethan's life. People began to whisper. Old friends who'd once nodded along at his barbecue started picking their words more carefully. The social currency that had once lubricated his schemes was withdrawing. Reputation is a funny currency. You don't notice its weight until it's gone. But still, there was always a moment when I questioned whether I'd gone too far. I'd lie awake at night and feel the old ache of grief for the boy who once called me dad. Without thinking, would he deserve prison? Would he deserve to lose everything? Those questions sharpened my approach. I wanted proportionality. I wanted the law to do what the law is for, to hold people accountable without letting me become monstrous in the process. That moral course set the tone for the final step. We weren't going to humiliate him in public with a video or a viral post. We were going to let the quiet evidence do the humiliating. We were going to feed it to the right officials, in the right way, with witnesses who had nothing to gain by lying. We were going to dismantle the story he'd sold the town piece by piece. On a wet, ordinary Tuesday of the kind that makes you forget big things are happening. Maya called me at noon. Her voice was flat but steady. We've got enough to move forward, she said. If the DA files charges, they'll have to act. We need you to be ready to testify to what you remember about the desert, about the truck. Not drama, just facts. Can you do that? I thought of the desert, the wind, my throat like a dried up riverbed. I thought of Laura's handwriting in that journal, and the slow cruelty of a son who'd learned how to smile while a man died. I thought, too, of the man who had helped me clean up an engine at midnight, the boy who'd once been ashamed to call me father. Yes, I told her, I can do that. Because sometimes, the only way forward is to put the pieces down and let the system pick them up. I'd come this far. There was no turning back. The trap was set, not with violence, but with law, with patience, and with small acts of courage. The quiet revenge was ready to be seen, and the first whispers of the final act were already starting to stir. The morning I was called to testify, it rained for the first time in months. A slow, steady rain, the kind that soaks the desert dust and makes it smell like metal and memory. I took it as a sign, maybe of cleansing, maybe of reckoning. When I walked into that courthouse, my hands trembled, not from fear or from restraint, because part of me wanted to look Ethan in the eye and ask him why he did it, why he left me to die when all I ever did was try to be his father. But the older part of me, the part that had learned silence could be sharper than shouting, that told me to wait. Ethan sat at the defense table, perfectly pressed suit, polished shoes, a lawyer whispering in his ear. He still had that charm, that clean, rehearsed face that people trusted. For a second, I saw the boy who once laughed at my bad jokes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. The Da Harris was steady, methodical. He started with the facts, the withdrawals, the forged documents, the discrepancies in signatures, the false statements to police. Piece by piece, he dismantled the story Ethan had told. When my name was called, I stood up slowly. The wood creaked beneath my shoes, that old, tired creak that echoed louder in my chest than in the room. I raised my right hand, took the oath, and sat down. Harris asked me to describe what happened. I told it straight. No drama. I talked about the trip, the desert, the missing truck, the hospital, the empty house. And as I spoke, I kept my eyes fixed on Ethan. He wouldn't look at me. Not once. When I mentioned the missing money, his jaw flexed. When I talked about Laura's journal, his lawyer scribbled notes furiously. And when I said, I don't want revenge, I just want the truth on record, the room went silent. That line wasn't in the script. I hadn't rehearsed it. It just came out, like something Laura would have said. By the end of my testimony, I could feel the room shift. The jurors didn't look at him the same way anymore. The charm had cracked. The hero narrative was starting to rot. When it was his turn, Ethan took the stand. His lawyer tried to paint me as unstable, grieving, traumatized, and reliable. It might have worked if Ethan hadn't overplayed his hand. He got emotional too quickly, too scripted, tears without depth. Like he'd practiced sadness in a mirror. He called me confused, said he tried his best to care for me, that I'd wandered off on my own, that the bank money was a misunderstanding. But lies sound different when they're spoken next to truth. You can feel it in the air, that thin tremor of dishonesty. When Harris showed the gas station footage Rick had dug up Ethan at the pump, filling his tank after he claimed to be searching for me, Ethan's face went blank. And for the first time, the jurors saw what I'd seen all along. Calculation. The case didn't last long after that. The dough pressed forgery, fraud, and attempted homicide by abandonment. Bail was denied. The town whispered. Friends stopped calling him. His lawyer withdrew. You'd think that would have been the moment I felt peace. It wasn't. It felt hollow. Because I realized justice doesn't bring back what betrayal takes. It just evens the scoreboard. I went home that night and sat in Laura's old chair by the window. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger, just exhaustion. That's when I noticed something odd. A small, padded envelope propped against the door. No return address. Postmarked 3 weeks ago. Inside was a USB drive. No note, no sender. Just the name Laura written in faded ink. I plugged it into my old laptop, expecting maybe photos or a recording of her voice. Instead, there was a single video file titled For Frank and Ethan. My heart stopped. The timestamp said it was recorded just 10 days before she died. I clicked play. Laura sat in her hospital bed, frail, wrapped in a blanket, but smiling. That same tired, luminous smile that could light up even the worst day. She spoke softly. Frank, Ethan, if you're watching this, I guess I didn't get to say goodbye properly. She coughed, then continued. You two were the best parts of my life. You made me whole. And I need you both to promise me something. Don't let grief turn into blame. My throat tightened. Ethan, she said, I know you're worried about the will. I changed it, but not for the reason you think. I wanted Frank to manage the house until you were ready. I trust him. I always have. But everything I own, it's meant to be shared between you both, 50-50, because you're family. And love isn't ownership, it's stewardship. I froze. Her eyes flicked toward the camera up straight into me. Frank, I know you'll do what's right. Don't let the past harden you. Please. The screen faded to black. For a long time, I just sat there, silent. The sound of the rain tapping on the window. The truth was like cold water down my spine. Laura had changed her will, yes. But not to disinherit Ethan. Not to cut him out. To protect him. To make sure I'd keep him safe. And he had never known. He thought I'd stolen his mother's legacy, that I'd manipulated her into cutting him out. That's why he hated me. Why he left me in that desert. In his mind, I was the thief, the usurper. He didn't betray me out of greed. He betrayed me out of belief. A twisted, misinformed sense of justice. My hands started shaking so hard I almost dropped the laptop. Everything I'd done, every plan, every document, every carefully built trap, was based on a misunderstanding that could never be undone. The next morning, I went to the DA's office with the USB. Harris watched the video in silence. When it ended, he just exhaled slowly. He said, "It doesn't change the crimes, Frank, but it changes the story." And he was right. It didn't erase what Ethan did, but it shifted it from pure malice to something tragically human. When the trial resumed, I made a request to testify one last time. The court allowed it. I told them what I'd learned. I told them about Laura's message, about how she trusted us both, and how fear had turned that trust into ruin. I didn't ask for leniency. I didn't beg for punishment. I just told the truth. Ethan cried for the first time then. Not performative tears, real ones. The kind that come from finally understanding too late. He looked at me, really looked at me, and whispered, "I thought you took her from me." And all I could say back was, "You did." That broke him. He pled guilty a week later. The judge offered a reduced sentence for full restitution and confession. He took it. The papers called it a stunning case of familial betrayal. They said justice had been served. but I didn't feel like justice had won. I felt like love had been lost twice. A few months later, I went back to that same desert road. The wind was softer this time. The sand no longer stung. I brought a small wooden cross, not for me, not for Laura, for what we were. A family broken by assumption. I planted it in the sand where I'd almost died and whispered, "You were right, Laura. Grief does turn into blame, but it doesn't have to stay that way." Then I stood there until the sun dipped behind the horizon, watching the sky turn orange, then violet, then night. I could almost hear her laugh again. And for the first time in years, it didn't hurt. When I got home, I poured a cup of coffee, sat down, and turned on the camera on my old laptop. I started recording because I realized something. People don't just die once. They die when we stop telling their story right. So here I am telling mine. Not to punish, not to prove anything, but to remind whoever's listening that truth is never as simple as it seems. And that love, real love, doesn't end with betrayal. It endures it, even when it's too late. What would you have done if your own family betrayed you like this, only to learn you might have misunderstood them all along? They say time heals everything. I don't believe that. Time doesn't heal, it just gives the pain new places to hide. After the trial, my life didn't go back to normal, because there was no normal left to return to. I sold the old house, the one Laura and I built. Every corner carried ghosts, her laughter, Ethan's footsteps, my own guilt echoing in the hallways. I couldn't walk past the kitchen without remembering her singing, off-key to old country songs, or the mornings Ethan used to sit at the counter, pretending to study while sneaking spoonfuls of cereal straight from the box. I moved into a smaller place, a cabin near the lake just outside town. It was quiet at first, but over time, that silence became something sacred. A space to breathe, to think, to try to forgive. For months, I avoided people. The neighbors were kind, but I wasn't ready to answer their questions or to see the pity in their eyes. Everyone had heard the story. Everyone knew how my stepson left me to die, how justice had been served, how the town admired my strength. But none of them knew how heavy justice feels when it finally lands. Because winning didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving barely. Ethan was sentenced to 6 years. The court called it a plea for cooperation, remorse, and restitution. He'd pay back what he took, and he'd serve his time. I didn't attend the sentencing. I couldn't. I'd already watched him break once on the stand. I didn't need to see it again. But 3 months later, I got a letter from him, postmarked from the state penitentiary. I stared at it for 2 days before I opened it. It was written in small, and even handwriting. "Frank, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say it. I didn't hate you because of what you did. I hated you because of what I thought you did." Mom's message. I saw it too late. I wish I could take it back, that day in the desert. The words I said, the lies I told. I was blinded by grief. I thought I was protecting her memory. I've replayed that day 1,000 times in my head. You calling my name in the distance. I can still hear it. I'm sorry. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope someday you find peace, even if it's without me. Ethan. I must have read that letter 100 times. The paper got soft from my hands. The ink faded from the salt of my tears. I didn't write back. Not at first. What do you say to the man who almost killed you, but didn't mean to? What do you say when the person who destroyed your life did it out of love, misplaced, but love all the same? Months passed. Seasons turned. The lake froze, thawed, then bloomed again with Lila. And slowly, I started to live again. I took morning walks down to the dock, coffee in hand, the sky bleeding gold and pink across the water. Some days I'd bring Laura's old journal, the one I'd read in the hospital. Her handwriting had always calmed me. It reminded me of gentleness, as something I'd forgotten existed inside me. One entry caught my attention one morning. It was dated about a month before she passed. She'd written, "Frank tries so hard to fix everything. Ethan tries so hard to understand everything. I wish they'd both just be." Life isn't about fixing or understanding. It's about staying, just staying. That line hit me like a quiet truth I'd missed all my life. I'd spent years trying to fix things, the marriage, Ethan, the betrayal, even the justice afterward. But maybe the real strength wasn't in fixing. Maybe it was in staying through pain, through loss, through uncertainty. That day, I wrote Ethan back. "Ethan, I got your letter. I've carried it with me every day. I don't know if forgiveness is something you earn or something you give, but I think your mother would have wanted both of us to stop carrying this weight. You don't owe me peace. You owe yourself peace. I can't forget what happened, but I can try to understand it. Frank. I mailed it, not expecting a reply, but I got one. Then another, and another. Every few weeks, a letter arrived, each one a little longer, a little more honest. He told me about prison life, the small routines, the faces that came and went. He talked about reading books again, helping another inmate learn to write, working in the kitchen. He said he'd started therapy, that for the first time in his life. He was trying to understand himself, not just react. I could feel Laura in those letters. Her voice, her warmth, her belief that no one was ever too far gone. About a year into his sentence, I decided to visit him. The drive to the prison was long and quiet, miles of desert again. But this time, I wasn't afraid of it. I brought one of Laura's photos, the three of us, at a county fair, smiling like fools with melted ice cream in our hands. When Ethan walked into the visiting room, I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight. His hair was shorter, but his eyes, they were the same. Haunted, humbled. We sat across from each other, the glass between us. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, he said, "You came." I nodded. "Yeah, your mom would have wanted me to." He looked down, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. "I still don't understand how you can sit here after everything I did." I told him the truth. "Because I almost became you. I almost let anger eat me alive. But I remembered something she said, that love doesn't end with betrayal. It endures it, even when it's too late." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. We talked for nearly 2 hours. About her, about the past, about what forgiveness might mean if neither of us really deserved it. Before I left, I slid the photo across the counter. "Keep it," I said. "She'd want us to remember her like this." He pressed his hand to the glass over the picture. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't," I said. "Just lived if different." In the years that followed, our letters continued. When his sentence ended, he wrote to tell me he was working construction in another state, trying to rebuild, literally and figuratively. He didn't ask for a visit, and I didn't offer one. Some silences are sacred, they hold peace better than words ever could. But every Christmas, without fail, I get a card. No return address, just a short note inside, "Still staying." And I smile every time. I don't think Laura ever meant for any of this to happen, but I also think she knew something we didn't, that love isn't proven in easy moments, but in the ones where forgiveness seems impossible. Sometimes, I sit on the porch at sunset and think about her final message, about what it meant for both of us to share what she left behind. It wasn't about the house, or the money, or the will. It was about the love she'd poured into us, how it still connected us even after death and betrayal tried to tear it apart. In a way, that's her real legacy, not property, but peace. A few months ago, a young man from town came to see me. He said he'd heard my story, that his own father had cut him off, that he didn't know how to forgive. He asked me, "How did you do it? How do you forgive someone who left you to die?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. And then I said, "You don't forgive the action. You forgive the person. Because sometimes, the person they were then isn't the person they become later. And if you carry it long enough, it becomes your identity. Forgiveness is how you take it back." He nodded, tears in his eyes. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was passing it on. The way Laura passed on hers. It's strange, you know, how life comes full circle. The same desert that once almost killed me now feels like part of me. The same boy who betrayed me now signs his letters with love. And the same pain that once made me hate has turned into the thing that makes me human. I still talk to Laura sometimes, not out loud, but quietly, in the still moments before dawn. I tell her about the letters, about the peace, about how her two stubborn men finally learned to stay. And sometimes, when the wind wrestles through the trees, I swear I can hear her voice saying, "Good. That's all I ever wanted." I guess that's the real ending. Not the trial, not the revenge, not even the forgiveness. It's the choice to keep going, to live without needing to rewrite the past. Because maybe the real revenge isn't about making someone pay. Maybe it's about not letting what they did define who you are. If you've listened this far, thank you for staying. And I mean that. Because staying even when it hurts, even when it's messy, is the hardest part. So tell me, what would you have done if your own family betrayed you like this? Would you seek revenge, or would you seek peace? If this story moved you, subscribe for more real confessions like this one. Stories about family, betrayal, forgiveness, and the power of truth. Because sometimes, the most painful stories are the ones that teach us how to live.